Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Michael, and also for a great talk from Bridget. So what I will try to do now, like Michael said, is give a more personal perspective about some of the considerations, the relevant EU policy drivers, and the shape and structure of Horizon Europe, because these are some of the things that we are thinking about within Elixir as well. So this will be my own personal perspective from the point of view of another research infrastructure looking at these types of topics and themes. So Bridget mentioned really nicely at the beginning of her talk some of the relevant policy drivers like the Green Deal and the ERA versus Corona Action Plan. And what I wanted to do was just pick up on some of those examples. Obviously, there are many EU and member state level policy drivers that are really important for research infrastructures when they think about their implementation. And I couldn't list them all on the slide. There are many, many of them. Some of them are domain specific. For example, the EU Bioeconomy Action Plan, which was just updated in 2018 and is clearly in a domain that is very relevant to ABISBA. Whereas some of them, like the ERA communication, which was just produced recently, is more transversal, where research infrastructures in general are quite important. And so there are lots of different policy drivers out there, and it's really important for research infrastructures like ABISBA to be able to engage in them, shape them as they're being developed, and then to be able to help implement some of those actions that are described and defined in those policy drivers. So I think I've mentioned the Bioeconomy Action Plan, which is updated, is obviously quite a broad policy driver, not purely focused on research infrastructures at all. But obviously, if we look at what ABISBA is, the support to industrial biotechnology and support to the bioeconomy, there's very strong linkages there. The ERA communication, which was recently updated, I think one area that's quite interesting there is the focus on technological infrastructures. So most of the work that's been done in the research infrastructures program to date has been about research infrastructures. And there's quite a clear, well-defined concept of what research infrastructures are. But now there's a new emergence of a definition of technological infrastructures. And given the type of services that ABISBA provides, I think it's important to try and understand the relationship between ABISBA and this definition of a technological infrastructure that is emerging and being described in the ERA communication and then implemented through future research infrastructure programs as well. We have other drivers which Bridget mentioned, like the Green Deal, which I won't cover because that's been mentioned already. And then there are other wider drivers which are very relevant to Elixir, and I would say also relevant to ABISBA too, because one of the common themes of all research infrastructures is that they either provide access to data or the facilities that they manage in which users access generate data themselves. So the theme of data is also transversal. And if we look at the European data strategy, there was a consultation earlier this year, and the aim with this is to try and create a space within Europe where data can more freely move. So if we think of the main aims of the European Union with freedom of movement of people, goods, for example, we're trying to have a similar concept for data and a list of actions and possible legislation that will come over the coming years to help realize this, including the creation of data spaces like the European Health Data Space, or perhaps a green data space where we link research data with other data types. And that's really going to be important for research infrastructures, especially Elixir. And I would also say for ABISBA to think through what their role and possible means of helping to implement that as well. And on a similar theme of open science and data management, as Bridget mentioned, we have the European Open Science Cloud Partnership, as well as some data management drivers. And of course, it's a good thing for research infrastructures to think through the call that's open at the moment to potentially become a member of the EOSC association as well. So there's a lot of things that are happening. This slide just gives an idea of some of them. And the reason I mention this is because the next slide, this tries to give an idea about how you can have an EU level policy and how that can end up having strong and positive implications for the implementation of a research infrastructure. So Bridget rightly mentioned the importance of the European coronavirus response. So we have the ERA versus Corona Action Plan, so a high-level document from the Commission and Member States, launched by the Research Commissioner, and that stresses the importance of research infrastructures generally. And we've seen fantastic work where all of the research infrastructures have tried to mobilize resources and come up with lists of research infrastructure services that can be used for coronavirus related research. So that's very important, the role of research infrastructures in that document. And then also that at the same time called for the creation of a COVID-19 data portal. So research data from COVID-19 research projects would have a home and would have a place where they're stored so other researchers and scientists can access them. And that was another strong feature of the ERA versus Corona Action Plan. And at the same time, funding mechanisms were created. So member states jointly agreed to invest in a series of different packages, not just relating to research, but that was one part of it. And we can see a combination of that high level commitment to the policy and the funding package has resulted in a fast tracking and release of the European COVID-19 data portal, which is managed by our partners in Elixir through an uplift to some of the grants like the Elixir Converge project. And so I wanted to mention this as an example of how high-level policy developments can have a direct impact on the implementation of research infrastructures like Elixir and IBISBA, which is why it's very important for us to think through these high-level policy actions as well. If I move on to Horizon Europe, so this is my own personal view on some of the areas that could be of interest to IBISBA. I won't spend too much time talking on this because others, Bridget and Gail, will have more experience in being able to go into more detail of this. But what I think is important is that as well as the research infrastructures program, which has been covered really nicely in the previous talk, I think it's important to think about other opportunities across Horizon Europe as well. And I think it can be a challenge. It means that we all need to be aware of developments in Pillar 2, as well as other areas as well, like widening participation and spreading excellence. But I think the days are gone of just assuming that one infrastructure can be implemented through the Research Infrastructures Programme. I think really there are so many different tasks and activities that need to be done and potential users that require support, that all infrastructures need to think beyond just the Research Infrastructures Programme and to see what else is out there as well. And of course that brings challenges because we all know the Research Infrastructures Programme well. That's our heart, that's where we've been created from. But at the same time, some of the users of the services that will be getting access to us may be research projects that are funded through Pillar 2, or we might want to use some of the capacity building support to help connect our infrastructure, especially in developing regions, through using twinning and teaming opportunities in the widening participation and spreading excellence theme as well. So it means that we need to take a broader look at what's there in Horizon Europe than perhaps we've needed to in previous years. And if on my final slide, just to give a series of personal reflections and what I think are important considerations, and certainly these are topics that we're thinking a lot about in Elixir as well. So if we look at the Research Infrastructures Programme, then obviously there are budget pressures. So from the original Commission proposal for Horizon Europe to the Parliament's expanded proposal earlier in the year, through to what we see now is the agreement on Horizon Europe in total, and then the Research Infrastructures Programme as part of that, then obviously the budget is being reduced somewhat, which means that there are constraints that we need to operate within. And then the question is, how is that implemented in practice? And I think as research infrastructures, we're all interested in knowing how European funding will be targeted on either the creation of new infrastructures versus the connection of existing infrastructures, but also how that sits with the support to existing research infrastructures as well, like IBISBA and like all of the other mature projects or landmarks on the S3 roadmap. And that balance of targeted funding to go on either the creation or connection of existing ones versus the support to the operation of existing ones. And here we have context from things like the long-term sustainability plan, the action plan that was produced with ESFRI, making recommendations to research infrastructures to try and diversify funding streams, because it was going to be difficult to rely on European funding for the operation of individual research infrastructures in the long term. And that certainly seems to be the case when we look at what might happen in the next program as well. So overall, what this means is that we need to also connect to try to get more member state support for the research infrastructures. That's really critical. And that's difficult when member state budgets for research infrastructures haven't necessarily increased at the same rate that the ESFRI roadmap itself has increased. So there are challenges in doing that, but it's something that we need to continue to work towards. And then going back to a point I made earlier, I think it's really important that we look at how we can work with, support, and play a role in the other themes of Horizon Europe as well. This is something that we've been doing a lot of in Elixir in Horizon 2020, and we expect to do the same in Horizon Europe as well. So how can we engage in clusters, like for our case, health, and cluster 1 for health, and cluster 6 for food, agricultures, bioeconomy, fisheries, environment, because they are all areas that have data management needs that we feel that we can help with and want to play a role in as well. And there, I think the main question, and this would be the case for ABISBA as well, is how can we develop appropriate mechanisms to allow us to engage effectively? Because there could be, in our case, in Elixir, there are potentially hundreds of research projects through cluster 1 and cluster 6 that generate data. And we can't necessarily take part in all of those projects because the scale is just impossible. But what we want to do is to be able to provide the data infrastructure. So data generated from those projects go into the correct databases. So the data themselves are fair when they are generated. And I think for research infrastructures that provide access to physical facilities like ABISBA, it's quite an important topic to think about how you can work with projects that are funded through these clusters when there could be many of them that might require your services. And I think this is also going to be the same for not just the clusters, but also the partnerships and the missions as well. So the research infrastructures themselves have worked collectively to try and make sure that the mission boards for in the area of the biomedical sciences, like cancer and soils and healthy ocean, are aware of the services that we can provide. And I think research infrastructures need to do this individually as well as collectively to make sure that whatever projects are funded through the Cancer Mission Board or the Healthy Soils Mission Board, for example, that they know about how those projects can use the facilities of our research infrastructures. I think capacity building is important from an operational point of view, because all projects on the all life science projects on the ESFRI roadmap are distributed. And that means that sometimes we are helping to connect and provide access to facilities in very well developed regions, as well as some regions that are developing. And so there are schemes in Horizon Europe that allow us to try and utilize those things, like the twinning and teaming, where you can help to build capacity in developing regions by connecting them to resources in more advanced regions. But then also utilizing structural funds. In Elixir, we have many examples of where Estonia, Greece, Portugal, Czech Republic, Slovenia have all benefited from national projects that have been funded through structural funds. But it's not easy because in our case, most of the services that we provide are virtual. It's people that are working behind computers and running bioinformatics resources. And so accessing structural funds for those types of activities is not easier. Sometimes it can be easier to get structural funds to fund new physical resources and facilities, but it's something to think about as well. And then also international collaboration opportunities as well. What we don't want to do in Elixir is just build a European network that isn't connected to other counterparts across Europe. And we've been conscious of this from Elixir, and we've been able to utilize previous EU projects to develop an international strategy to connect with Australia, with the US, with Canada, with South Africa, to make sure that the standards being developed or the training courses that are being developed are not done in isolation and are done collectively around the world. And for Elixir, working on data standards and interoperability, these are really important themes as well, which may well also be the case for Abisba.